Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. We're going to give it a couple of minutes to let everyone join, and then we'll get started. Hello to everyone just joining. We are a minute early, so we're going to give it a couple of minutes to let everyone join, and then we're going to get started. Amazing. I can see a few more people joining now. I'm just going to give it to 12:01, and then we can jump straight in. Fab. So it's just hit 12:01, so I think we can get started now. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for the second social media webinar. If you were here for the last one, you should recognize us, hopefully. But for those who are new, my name is Bethany. I'm the Marketing and Comms Manager here at Big Give. Joined on the call with me is Sahil, my colleague, and Teresa, who will be holding this session today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we do get started. As Sahil has kindly already mentioned, please use that chat box at the bottom of your Zoom panel to introduce yourself, share ideas, and make sure you do click everyone in that little blue box so everyone can see your message. If you have any questions throughout the session, we will be answering those throughout the session and at the end, but please do put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom panel and we'll make sure that we don't miss them. If you need captions for any reason, there is a show captions button at the bottom of your Zoom panel. Please do click on that and captions should show for this. And of course, we are recording this, so you will see the recording hopefully on YouTube at the end of the day if you do need to share amongst your colleagues as well. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Teresa.
Thanks, Beth. Hello, everyone. So some of you may have joined yesterday. We ran our first webinar on social media best practices. And today's the follow-up is talking about emerging social media channels and how to use them. So my name is Teresa Litza. I'm a marketing consultant. I've been working in marketing for 11 years, and I just love talking about social media. And obviously, it's crazy how much it's changed over the last 10 years. So just before we jump into the emerging social media channels, it's also really important when thinking about campaigns or your digital presence in general, to choose the right social media channels for you and your organization. So how do you choose the right channels for your next campaign? You want to make sure, first of all, you pick the channels that your audience spends more time. So you might say, I want to spend more time on Facebook, but if your audience is not really there, then you're just creating content that not the ones you want to really see. Or if you want to say, I'm going to stay on Twitter, but actually my audience already left, then you're just wasting time. So you want to understand how is the engagement on my current channels and what's working best. You also want to think of the resources. So it's always tempting to jump on new channels, try new trends, but obviously there's limited time and you want to think, am I able to continue using the channel? Does it make sense for my organization to be active on another channel? How comfortable also are you using it? Do you feel that this is the right channel for you, for your organization, for your audience? And then you also want to think of the objectives. So when you join a new channel or when you use your existing one, what do you want to achieve? How is the specific channel going to help you to meet your campaign objective? You might want to try a very niche channel, and we might talk about a few of them today. But then you realize, actually, my audience is not there, and it doesn't really help me with fundraising. So you want to think, how are the channels that I'm using really make sense for what I have in mind? So before you try with new channels, you want to start with your existing channels. You want to review where you're active, just to make sure that you know how you're using them before your campaign. So it's definitely a good idea now to create a list of the channels that you're active. You can go to analytics and review the demographics just to understand the people who are following you. It's definitely a good idea to look at the engagement and the reach, just to understand the kind of posts that work well, what are the most engaging ideas, or how is the reach compared from one channel to another. Then you also want to review, you might go to Google Analytics and see the traffic that comes from different channels to your website, just to understand how each channel is really bringing more traffic back to your organization's site. And also a good idea now, before you start the campaign, is to start with a different post just to test the algorithm. You want to think, how are my existing channels really working? What can I really improve? So for example, you might have heard that on LinkedIn, the text box work really well. So just text, no images, no videos. But this is always an assumption. It's best practice. You want to make sure that you try it on your own. So I tried it last week, for example, and I noticed that when you share text posts on your profile, it works better than sharing it on your company page. So things like that, it just gives you an idea on what works best. And it's also what works best for your organization. It's not just general best practices. And also when you think of your active channels, you also want to see how easy is it to keep them active? Is it something feasible? Is it taking too much time? Does it justify the effort? Just to understand all the channels really and what works best for you. So when thinking of the campaign ahead and your digital presence in general, it's probably best to think that most of your focus, or let's say 90% of your focus, should be on the channels that you're already active. So these are the channels that you already have an active audience. They're following you, they see your posts, and it's definitely easier than jumping all of a sudden to new channels only. It's always a good idea to have some space and some time for experimentation. This could be about trying new content formats, it could be about new channels, but you also want to make sure that the majority of your focus is really on what's already working. And we also mentioned that yesterday, it's definitely a good idea to map out your channels, create a list, write down on a spreadsheet, mention the channels that you're active. So you want to have a think, what are my active channels? Which are the ones that I'm planning to use for my campaign? Who is there? Who is my audience? Look at the demographics, try to understand the difference from one channel to another. And then think about the frequency and the content. How many times am I posting on each channel? And what are the kind of posts that I'm sharing? And something that we also mentioned yesterday, it's always good to look at some benchmarks and stats, but obviously this is just guidance. It doesn't really mean anything if you don't compare this with your organization and what's working. But it's interesting to see that right now, according to Hootsuite, the most engaging platform for nonprofits is Instagram. And the second one, which is actually surprising if you think of how it changed through the years, is LinkedIn, and it's very close to Instagram. And then there's Facebook, there's X, and the fifth one is TikTok. So obviously this is just a starting point, but you want to think, how does that work for my organization? So before we jump into the emerging channels, might be good to check with everyone on the chat. What are the channels that you're currently active that you're planning to use in your campaign? Just to see if it's similar to these numbers or if it's completely different. See LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Instagram and Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and maybe TikTok. So pretty much what we see here, the majority is focusing on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And obviously there's X and TikTok. Perfect. So if you haven't checked the session yesterday, we ran on best practices for the most popular channels. It's already on YouTube. So you can find more about Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'll continue a bit the conversation today on Twitter and in terms of how to manage the presence. So we talked yesterday about the best practice of how to use Twitter, but also it's thinking, what if you feel that it doesn't really make sense anymore to be on Twitter, X? So there are many organizations and charities specifically who are really thinking their presence on Twitter, and it makes sense. There are many reasons to think of that. Over the last year, it really has been unpredictable. So there is an issue with analytics, reduced reach, engagement. There's a blue subscription, which pretty much means that you can only run ads now as a paid subscriber. There are many organizations who already shared that I'm just quitting. I don't feel that it makes sense. And the most important thing, especially for charities, is the concerns around safety and ethics and also misinformation. So you want to think, does it make sense for my organization to be there? And how do you determine if it makes sense? So if you're planning to live, or if you thought of that, you want to think, is my audience still there? So this is really important, because you might say, I don't enjoy Twitter, but if it's your most engaging platform, then you really want to think, what's the alternative? How can I make sure that I don't lose my audience? I don't lose the engagement. And I've heard several organizations saying that actually engagement is still great. So if you feel that it's still working for you, then there's no reason to think of leaving. But also if you feel that I'm keep sharing posts, but actually I don't get any engagement, then that's probably an indication that you're spending too much time without getting the right impact back. Then you also want to think, again, mentioning ethics and safety concerns and misinformation and all the other issues with Twitter right now. So how is your presence affecting your organization? There are many cases hearing about concerns of an organization just being active on Twitter, how that affects the image of the organization, and how does the team, the board, the trustees feel about that. So it's definitely something to discuss with your stakeholders, have some internal conversations, and just try to understand the mix in between what's currently working, if it's still working for you, but also, are there any consequences for you to still be there? Is it something that you need to consider now? Or is it maybe what many organizations are doing? They're keeping an eye on how things are going, and they just want to make sure that they monitor the situation to decide later on what to do. And then, so just a summary of the things that you want to consider if you want to live, or if you're planning at some point in the future to live. It's try to understand your audience, see if they're still there. Think of the objective. So how do you use Twitter right now? What do you get out of it? What is it something that it's really good for? And are there any alternatives? How do you plan to guide your audience, for example, to another channel? You definitely want to have a chat with your stakeholders. You want to see how that goes into the mix of the other channels. How there's a difference between being active on Twitter compared to other channels? Are there any new ones that you want to try? What are the ethical considerations? How does that affect your community? Because at the end of the day, if it puts your community at risk, even if you have engagement, it might not be a good idea to stay. So all you want pretty much is have some sort of strategy in place. And even if you're not planning to live now, it's definitely a good idea to have a think of them. So this is the idea of some sort of exit comms strategy. So you want to think all the things we mentioned, to have a comms plan in place. So even if you say I'm continuing with my presence, but I'm keeping an eye on things, you want to be prepared in advance, because there may be a big change from Twitter. For example, there were rumors about potential charging on users. It might start as an experiment, but you don't really know what's happening, let's say in 6 months from now. So you want to be prepared in case you might have a quick exit, or any issue with ethics, with misinformation, with safety, that you feel that you really need to exit the platform. So you want to have that conversation internally, but also think in the exit comm strategy. How do you communicate the announcement, both internally and externally? So I saw Mermaids, for example, this month they decided to quit Twitter. They wrote a blog about that, explaining the announcement, why they do that, to protect their community. But also they made sure that they share the blog also on Twitter, because there's still audience there. You keep the account present, at least for a set period, if you decide to also delete it. But it's a way to direct users to other channels. So this is really important. If you were already active on Twitter, you want to make sure that you don't lose your followers. You want to guide them to your website, to an email, to other social channels, and making sure that they really understand your decision and that they don't expect you to be active on the channel anymore. And then, of course, if you decide to leave, you also want to think of the logistics. So update the social icons on your website and make sure that there isn't anything left on any presence that still gets people onto your Twitter account. So it might be good to check with people here. So Carrie, that was Mermaids, the organization that decided to leave Twitter this month. Maybe good to check with everyone. Has anyone thought of leaving Twitter? Are you having any concerns, or have you already done that? I still mention it, Twitter. I can be used to X, really. Emma says, we haven't officially left, but I have stopped posting on there. That's still a good point. Child.org says we left. We weren't getting any engagement anyway, so stop using it. Peter says still on there, but more focus on Instagram. Kerry, we're still on it and have some concerns. We have not found an alternative yet. Sarah, I wasn't aware there were so many concerns. Yes, actually, the more you look at it, the more terrifying it gets. That's another story. Still on it, but mostly using LinkedIn. We're still on it, but lower engagement indeed. Mastodon is not really a great alternative. We still have it, but focusing on other channels. Still on it. Rose says, I agree with Sarah. We have our greatest following on X. That's still a good reason. So that's exactly the case. Looking at the stats, looking at your audience and decide. Brioni is asking, is Threads a viable alternative to Twitter? We'll talk about Threads right after. But short answer, also mentioning Mastodon, there isn't a platform yet that really replicates the Twitter experience, which is the reason really that many users are still there. Maybe Threads could be one, but still not there yet. Bianca says our best following tends to still be on Twitter currently. It's not an easy decision, and it's not something that you probably need to have rushed in terms of deciding all of a sudden, I'm not going to post anymore. You want to have that conversation with your team, within the organization, with the stakeholders, but also just looking at the numbers and just having a look at everything that's happening right now. If you feel that you can still continue, that's totally fine, of course. If you feel that it doesn't justify it in terms of numbers, engagement, audience, then it's better than just using your time to share content that nobody really sees. Perfect. So let's talk about Threads. So Threads is owned by Meta, which also owns Facebook and Instagram. It's one of the channels that could be a potential alternative to Twitter X, what we just started discussing. So what you need to know, it launched in July. It felt like a good opportunity for Meta to capitalize on the conversation about X. Many people were leaving. They wanted to create something that's very similar to Twitter. The problem is it's not available in the EU, and it's been many months now, and they're still trying to resolve that issue, something around privacy and data and how it's used. But they said that it's going to be available soon. We don't know what that means yet. A new addition to Threads, you can edit posts, something that was on demand on Twitter for many years. And now you can also share voice notes, and also in an accessible way. So you can just record a message and at the same time turn it to text. There are no hashtags yet, trending topics, direct messages, analytics. So as you can imagine, there are many features that really make it at a very early stage. And the audience is still small. There has been a growth this month, but it still has good engagement. So people who started using it from the start, they say that compared to the number of followers they get, they have good engagement. But again, you really need to manage your expectations. It's still very early. So how can you use it? The good thing with Threads is that it really looks like Twitter in the sense of like the simplistic form. You can share posts, you can add visual content, you can add GIFs, and it's pretty much about having conversations. And you can also promote your campaign. So it's a good thing is you can also cross-promote content. The fact that it's owned by Meta, it means that you can just share it on Instagram, you can share it on Facebook. And of course, it makes it easier because in order to create a Threads account, you need to have an Instagram account. So if you're already active on Instagram, it's really easy because you can direct your followers also to Threads. And in terms of using it, it's also a good idea to explore or having more conversations. So it's not just about broadcasting content. The fact that Threads is still early stage, it might make it easier to have some interactions with your supporters and make it a little bit more personal. So then you might wonder, is it really for you? Is it the time to join Threads? So you need to think, first of all, if you have an Instagram account, because they're linked. The fact that it's owned by Meta is a bit of a concern for some people in terms of the use of data. So some people said that I'm not comfortable with how they use data. And there's always the case of just moving from one channel to another. So for example, the last week or two, Threads started showing up on people's Instagram feed. So you can't opt out. Your Threads may show up on your followers' accounts on Instagram. So it's a little bit of a concern how comfortable you are with that. Maybe it's a good opportunity. For some people, it could be more exposure. But if you're not comfortable, you need to consider that. It's probably best to have a look at how others are using it. You want to confirm how do you want to use it. The good thing, it's really low effort. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can just share content you used to share on Twitter. And you can try to understand what gets more engagement. Of course, when starting with a new channel, you also want to think, do I have time to invest in that? Creating channels compared to 5 years ago is definitely harder nowadays to get the followers back and grow the audience. So you want to think, does it make sense? Or do I prefer to bring people to my website, to my email, or to other existing social channels? And of course, you also want to check, is your audience there? If you create an account all of a sudden and start using it, are others there in terms of your supporters? If you create posts for all your existing social media channels and tell people to follow you on Threads, what would be the engagement? What would be the followers that would you get? So you want to start to understand, it's probably good to experiment at some point, because the fact that it's owned by Meta, it means that they want to invest in that and it will probably grow in the future. And maybe starting early is a good idea if it grows bigger. But also, if you feel that you don't have time, I definitely think that it's better to focus on a few channels rather than having too many at the same time. And I created a guide back in August when I just wanted to figure out Threads really, and collected screenshots from all different charities, how they joined, how they started using it. And it's probably good to have a look either on your own, go to Threads pretty much and click on other charities, see how they're using it, or you're welcome to have a look on best practices, just to understand how do you get started, what do you need to consider, and what are the ideas in terms of inspiration that you can get from other charities. But also it's good to consider that Threads keeps changing all the time. There are new features coming in. There are more things that they planned for the next months, and it will be growing, it will be changing. So let's check how many of you have used Threads or are thinking of joining Threads. So Bianca said, unsure about the transition to Threads. Our Instagram has decent engagement, but we're very uncertain to make the switch. Our audience may not be on Instagram, so unlikely. Joined, but not properly experiment on it yet. Made an account, but not used it. On Threads, but very few postings, maybe in the future. Not on it and a bit cautious at the moment. Yes, we use it, minimal posting. Pretty similar reaction to everyone. Made an account, considered it, not sure yet. Yeah, I would say the good thing is that you can always create the account and experiment a bit. It probably won't be your most popular channel anytime soon. If you want to experiment, if you have the time, you can just explore with a few posts, and you can just use existing visual assets, for example, from other channels. But you also want to make sure that you remember also the fact that it's not available in the EU. So you miss, if you're also going beyond the UK in terms of your audience, it's quite a big audience for more international charities. It will be available eventually, but it's also a consideration for many people that it's not really available to everyone. Checking the next comments, made a personal account, haven't made an account yet. Joined, but not using much, pretty similar. I've only used it personally, but have seen huge climate engagement topics and calls to action. That's a good indication. It's also useful to have a look at the search, just to see what others are talking about on your most interesting and relevant topics, just to see if the conversation is there. So let's jump on the next channel and just exploring alternatives to X. There are different channels, different audiences, and we recently hosted a session with Be More Digital. I'm happy to share the link. There's the recording online on alternatives to Twitter. And the conversation based on other charities, what everyone is doing, is that obviously there isn't one perfect channel. There are too many options out there. Some are new, some have been there for a while, but it's more about thinking. There's always a new channel. There are always more ideas. Does it make sense for your organization? So I would say it's probably best to think, if there's a specific channel that you want a specific reason to use it, what are the reasons that you were using Twitter and you want to find on another channel? Right now, there isn't a channel that really replicates the experience in every single area, and that's the reason many people are still on Twitter. But you also want to just have a look based on your available time, of course, and resources, if there is a very specific channel that makes sense for you. So after the conversation in the last few months of people leaving Twitter, we saw charities not really experiment with every single channel of them, but it's more just exploring on a personal level, if it makes sense for you. There was a conversation on Mastodon. There are many organizations who started trying it, or Blue Sky Social. Discord is also popular in different kind of way. And some of them are decentralized, which is always good. They're not owned by big organizations, but also it feels niche. They're not the kind of channels that you would just have as your most popular channel. But if you feel that your audience is there, like Reddit, for example, and Tumblr, they existed for so many years, but they can still bring you good traffic. So it's still understanding, how can I find a channel that works best for me? And how can I make sure that I have the right time? Because I definitely think that starting a new channel right now can be time consuming. So you only want to spend time and dedicate the time even more if it makes sense. Or else you just focus on the other channels, the ones that you're already active, and try to make the most of them. I'd love to see how many of you are active on any of these channels, or if you want to explore any of these. So I haven't joined all of them. I've joined a few of them, but I still wanted to make sure I share the list because my friend from Be More Digital pretty much did all the research. Again, I'm happy to share the recording as a follow-up. My kids love Discord. Yes, exactly. It's very specific in terms of the audience, but it's very engaging. Yes, Tumblr is still there, which is surprising. I used to have more access probably a decade ago. It's still there. Bianca says, looked at Mastodon, what made it got popular, found it hard to use. We use Hootsuite as social control and not sure how any of these integrate with it. Yes, that's also a case to create an account even on your own before joining as your organization, because you want to make sure how easy it is to use it in the end. Is it something that makes sense? Would your organization and your audience be there? So it could be something that you enjoy on a personal level, but not really making sense to your organization. Clubhouse was popular when it got launched for a bit, then it lost its popularity. It's more audience focused. Vivo is for video content. So again, it's another example. You want to make sure that you have the right content to create for the channel to make sense. Perfect. And also we need to talk about TikTok, of course, which is a very popular platform. It's one of the most engaging social platforms the last couple of years. And there's also an increased number of charities using it. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on if you already don't have a presence. So what you need to know, TikTok is a very engaging social platform. It's video focused. It's all about bite-sized content. Content can be very addictive, very engaging. You might just log in on the platform and just all of a sudden end up spending an hour just because the content is created in such a way and the algorithm that it really makes you check more content. It's different from other channels. It might be similar to Instagram Reels if you want a similar comparison, but Reels really was pretty much created after TikTok. And you really want to think, how can I create digestible content, maybe 10 seconds, and really make sure that I'm very specific with my message. It's not about long form content. It's really about standing out and make sure that people are noticing the content once they scroll on their feed. Could be an opportunity to reach a wider or new audience. It started appealing more to a younger generation, but really it's not just about younger demographics anymore. Everyone is spending more time on TikTok. And the good thing in terms of charities is that you can use donation stickers. And I see several charities are experimenting with it. And also TikTok ads, they're really effective. They have really good stats in terms of the return. So how can you use it? There are many different ways to use TikTok, but the first thing is really just to start understanding how it works. It's not as straightforward as the difference between Twitter and Threads, where it's similar pretty much in all many ways of creating content. It's not text focused, so you want to be more familiar with creating videos. You want to make sure that you scroll a bit on your feed and have an idea of how others create videos. There's a TikTok account called TikTok for Good, which is really useful because it shares examples from nonprofits or similar social good accounts where you can really understand in a more specific interest, how can you really create similar content? So what works well is creating educational content if you want to raise awareness about your cause, your campaign. You can also focus specifically on your campaign with donation stickers. You can tell stories about the impact. You can involve your team to make it more personal. You can involve people on the ground, volunteers, everyone, to just make sure that it doesn't feel just another video that you shared on every channel, that you spend a little bit more time. And also I've heard of cases when charities were using TikTok to build relationships. So you can just create a personally thank you video for donors or someone who really supported your campaign, and make sure that it's not just about fundraising exclusively and just asking for donations. You want to make sure that you build that relationship. It's a very engaging channels. Looking at benchmarks for all social media channels, it's probably one of the most engaging ones. So you want to make sure that we're going beyond your usual content, going beyond your demographics, that you also try new ideas. So obviously there's the question, is it really for you? Just because it's engaging in general, as you saw on the benchmarks, it's not necessarily as engaging for every single charity. And that's why it was fifth on the most popular channels for charities. But also we've seen examples of charities like RNLY, where they have really good engagement because they start understanding how the content really works on TikTok. And these are examples from the TikTok for Good account, what I said, trying to have a look of how others are using the channel. It's not necessarily taking more time. You can use Canva to create videos. It's more about understanding how it works. What are the kind of videos and content that work best for the account? So be creative, trying to understand how it works, check different accounts, and also try to see, first of all, if your audience is there. Because you could have a really great account, but if your audience is not using it, or if you don't have the following that makes sense, then it will just take a lot more time. But I'd say it's probably good to give it a try. It's a really engaging channel in general, and there are more people and charities who are jumping on board this year. So how many of you are on TikTok? It would be good to see, or how many are thinking of joining? So Peter says, TikTok, the few posts we've made have had very high levels of engagement. We struggle with video, to be honest, which is a very good concern. It's not always easy to create videos. That's why I mentioned, is it really for you? If you feel that it takes a lot of time, then it might not be the ideal channel. But you might also want to explore tools like Canva. How can you really create multiple images into a video? How can you just find ways when you can really have low barrier in terms of your video content? It doesn't always have to be perfect. That's definitely not the case for TikTok. Ali says we've been on it for a year and get good engagement, up to 45K reach on some videos, really great. It would be great to hear from those of you that use it successfully on what types of videos work well so that we help others. Chloe says, thinking of joining, we work with youth, so it would be a great way to engage many target audience. Yes, then it definitely sounds like a good idea. Emma says, I'd like to join, but not sure a small team has the capacity to grow on another platform. Also not sure a target audience are there. Very valid point. You definitely don't want to add another channel if you feel that it's already a struggle to keep up. Tips from Alice. So 2 tips. You get better engagement if you make the videos within the app rather than scheduling in Hootsuite, for example. And 4 p.m. is a great time to post. Really useful. Thanks, Alice. Bianca says, we're interested but don't have enough video content or manpower to create such content. Definitely valid. We're on it, but it takes time to create more content. Yes, but don't post very much. Hard to think of ideas that would appeal to the audience when our cause is quite serious. I would say also, if you're struggling at first to come up with content ideas, you might want to look at similar organizations, even on a bigger scale. What are others posting if it's a similar cause? You might not have the capacity in the end or the budget to create similar videos, but it still gives you an idea of the kind of posts that work well when it's a more serious topic and you can have light-hearted videos. And as I mentioned earlier, RNLY has a really good TikTok presence. As you can see on the numbers, for example, the pinned post, 3.8 million views. And it's not always about having this number. You won't always get these numbers, but it's also thinking, how can I use any opportunity of possible content to create new ideas? If a content is just, let's say, 10 seconds, how can I create a video of 1 minute and repurpose it and share it again in the future? It's more about the angle and the story that you're telling. It's not always the most fascinating video. It's not about creating a campaign video that lasts for 2 minutes. You want to think a little bit more creatively. And what we were discussing up to now, just takeaways really on adding a new channel to your list. So if you're, let's say you're ready to try a new channel, one of those that we discussed, or if you're already thinking of something else, how do you get started? What are the 6 steps? First of all, you want to find your audience. So you want to have a look maybe on different organizations that are focused on similar causes, or create an account and see if your audience is there, then start building it. So in order to start building it, you want to create a mini content plan. So it's not just about creating an account, posting once, and if you don't get engagement, you just stop using it. You want to have a plan, let's say, for a couple of months, just to see how it's going. You probably don't have many expectations at the start. You want to start building it. You want to use your existing channels and the active ones to bring people to the new channel. And you want to think ideas that make sense. As we said, for example, for TikTok, is more specific. The content is a little bit different from other channels. So you want to have that thinking. How can I use it? Do I have the capacity, of course, to use it? And then you want to find what works. So after, let's say, a month, you can go back and look at your existing content, see what worked best, see what was the post that piqued more interest for your audience, or was it something that had unexpected success? And then you also want to think, you want to measure the impact and the effort. If a video goes great, but it took you like a day to create it, obviously it's probably not the best use of your time. Or if you feel that the new channel is working better than expected, you might want to allocate more time from your existing channels. You really want to think of that impact and effort in terms of making sure that you're not spending more time, especially when you're really limited in terms of your resources. And then let's say after a couple of months, you want to have a look, you want to review your presence and how the mini content plan went, just to see if it makes sense to go beyond the trial period. So you do need to treat it as like a trial period. And if it doesn't make sense, you can still keep it active or semi-active and post on a more less frequent basis. But you probably, if you feel that it doesn't make sense after a couple of months, you don't want to keep it as active as what you tried at first. So let's continue the conversation. I just wanted to make sure we have that introduction on thinking of different channels. It would be great to hear from you on the channels that you're actually planning to use specifically on your upcoming Christmas challenge. Are you planning to try a new channel? Are you focusing on your most active ones?
Thank you, Teresa. Another really amazing session and lots of useful insights there. I can see there are a few questions. So whilst people reply to your recent response, I will say those to you. So we have one from Anna Maria who says, how do I sync IG and Threads like IG and Facebook is already from Meta Business?
So pretty much when you are joining Threads, you also get a notification on Instagram, at least when I joined in the very first days, that this user is active on Threads. And the fact that now the threads are showing up on people's Instagram feed, it means that it's an opportunity to just show up on where people are already active. And also when you create a threads, you can just share it on your story on Instagram. So it's an easy way also for you to just promote them at the same time. The way when you posted something on Facebook, it would also act if you want to share it on Instagram. So it's just a similar way of Meta and how the different channels work. Either you do it on your own, or a couple of tricks that they're experimenting on how to make sure that there is that link.
That's great. I can see a few people responding to you in the chat as well about what they're focusing on. Anna Maria actually had a couple more questions. One about how to detect the algorithm on X and how to use a donation sticker on TikTok.
Good point. So the donation sticker, you should be able to do it from adding nonprofit to your profile. I can share the link how to create the donation sticker. Just found it. You can find it at the chat. Pretty much it's when you create the video, but making sure you also have at the start of your profile to add nonprofit to your profile. And how can I detect the algorithm on X? Would you like to share more on that, Anna Maria? Is it more about on what's working?
Yeah, we'll give Anna Maria maybe a couple of minutes to
no worries.
respond.
Yeah, so it says, yeah. So I would say, as with every channel, you just want to create content to understand what's working for your specific case. It's not really a way that this is the way you should do it and everyone is doing it the right way. It's just figuring out on your own. Like if you share the content for 2 weeks in a row and you see that one post got better engagement than the other, then it means that these are the kind of posts that work best for you. It could be experimenting with the difference between images, videos, GIFs. You might want to share one image and the other time share 4 images in one post. So you want to understand how are the different content types of content ideas really work best for your organization.
I think there's a question from Bryony. She's asking, she's more familiar with Instagram, where disabled users and activists always include accessible content. Do you know which social media is the most accessible or more accessible?
This is a really good point. I haven't really checked that, but I would be very interested. And something that's also relevant, for example, Threads, when it launched as a platform back in July, it had no accessible features. People were complaining you couldn't even add an alt text. So there were many people and many charities who were saying, I can't really join. It's not accessible. And now they're able to, they allowed you to create alt text, which is something that exists on every platform. But I wouldn't say there's a platform that's really doing everything right. It's more on the state of like doing the bare essentials, really. That's a really good question. I'm definitely planning to check more on that.
I had a question, just going back to X/Twitter, is they've obviously had that increase in sort of character count for anyone that's subscribed to Twitter Blue or X Blue. Would you still recommend people just or charities keeping their posts to like 280? Because when I'm on X, I know a lot of those sort of long tweets I'll probably just wouldn't click see more, but I don't know if there's any data about that or anything like that.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case. How Threads came up with the whole idea of creating threads, because they saw on Twitter that it works really well. And it doesn't always mean that every thread will be more engaging than one tweet, but in general, yeah, it's something that the last year it worked well. So rather than creating one tweet at a time, you just create a series of tweets, which is also an easy way to beat the algorithm and just not have the limitation of 280 characters. So it might be a good idea to tell a story, tell more about your campaign, and just share more details in one post, really a series of posts.
Amazing. I think
there's a question from Sharon that's just popped up. She's asking, do you think we can create the same content for TikTok, Instagram Reel, and maybe YouTube Shorts as well?
I would say technically as content, yes, it's the same dimensions, the kind of video that probably works well on all. But you want to think it's a good practice if you don't have time, of course. But you also want to think what's the difference, maybe in the messaging, maybe in the caption that you have different from one channel to another. Because let's say someone follows you on 2 channels, it doesn't mean that it's always the case. How would they react if they see it on the 2 channels? So it could be just a really slight variation, or the video might be the same, but you want to think of a different spin, and especially if there are different demographics.
Thank you, Teresa. That's all really helpful. And I think we've come to the end of questions. But as always, if you do think of something that we haven't covered here, please do send us an email at hello@biggive.org, and we're happy to try and answer those the best we can, or potentially send over any questions to Teresa to get back to you on. But otherwise, this webinar has been recorded, so we will have it up hopefully this afternoon. But in the meantime, we hope you all have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.